Hello, everyone, and welcome to GPJFF in Conversation. I hope that you all enjoyed From Cairo to the Cloud, the world of the Cairo Geniza. Thank you so much for sharing your film with us, Michelle.
Thank you.
Now, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Olivia Ansis, and I'm the Executive Artistic Director of GPJFF. My job here today is very small, but important. It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of our conversation with Director Michelle Paymar, Yoram Meital. Welcome to GPJFF in Conversation, Yoram. Thank you so much for staying up late and joining us from Israel.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yoram Meital is a professor of Middle East Studies at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, Israel. His research focuses on the political, social, cultural, and economic developments in Middle Eastern societies, and his interests extend to international politics, peace and conflict studies, diplomacy, and more. Currently, he is conducting a comprehensive study of a dozen Cairo synagogues, intending to provide a rereading of the ways in which different sectors of Karen Jewry developed a modern Jewish Egyptian identity. Meital received his PhD from Haifa University and has held teaching and research positions at Harvard Law School, Skidmore College, Northeastern University, and Oxford University. Now, one last thing before I go, just a bit of housekeeping. For those watching, if you have a question for Michelle or Yoram, please submit your question or comment in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And please note you may vote for which questions you would like to be asked during the Q&A, with the most popular questions automatically moved to the top of the list.
I have a question. I cannot see you or Yoram.
Oh.
You can't?
I cannot, no. I only have myself.
That's
wow.
Very strange. Okay, we can figure that out. You saw us before we went live, though, right?
I did. I sure did, yeah.
That's crazy. But you are not having any issue, Yoram?
No, I see you perfectly, the two of you.
Can you hear us, though, Michelle?
I can. It seems like somebody just wrote in the chat that they can see all three people. So it might just be me.
Yeah, it's strange. I'm not sure what to do because I checked and everybody's camera and everybody's microphone is on. So I'm not sure exactly why. But would it be possible for you to just hear the questions from Yoram and participate?
Sure. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a little unnerving to not be able to see him, but
here, let's close this. Yeah, I'm not sure how that happened because that's never actually happened to us before.
Yeah, I'm looking for some sort of a solution.
Okay, well, we're waiting for Michelle to reconnect. I know everyone in the audience does see everybody here. Let's see if when she reconnects, this solves the issue. And Yoram, if you want to say a few words while we're figuring this out.
Got it.
Okay.
I got all three of you.
Sure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
oh,
that's
wonderful.
great.
It was just a restart, and it worked.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, so I am going to disappear now so that you can get on with the show and begin your conversation. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, Yoram and Michelle. Sorry for the technical difficulties.
Well, Olivia, thanks a lot for the kind introduction and, of course, for the invitation. And I'm very delighted to moderate this event. First, let me briefly introduce Michelle Paymar, who produced, directed, and filmed this award-winning film From Cairo to the Cloud, the world of the Cairo Geniza, which was out there 2 years ago, if I'm not wrong. Michelle has extensive credits as a director and writer of documentary and non-fiction television programs for major outlets, including NBC, ABC, CBS, PBS, all of them. History Channel, Discovery. Really wonderful to have you, Michelle, and for the opportunity to have this exchange, I hope, of ideas following your wonderful piece of work from Cairo to the cloud. I would just add that Michelle received a Master of Fine Arts in Film Directing from the American Film Institute and graduated from the University of California, Berkeley. So wonderful to have you. In person, I have watched this. This is a masterpiece. I have watched it twice and so much enjoyed the film. And I hope that in the next 15-20 minutes that we discuss some of the issues, I would give you the opportunity and to our audience to get much more closer to your work, to the way that you made this this very wonderful film. So From Cairo to the Cloud deals with the marvelous Cairo Geniza. There is no doubt about it. A topic which scholars from various fields of knowledge and disciplines deal with for over 120 years now. Mainly historians, biblical scholars, and manuscript experts. Each of them has a story for how he or she get to work on the Cairo Geniza. How did you, Michelle, end up with the idea of making a film about this heavy issue? Well, you understand my point here. How
Right.
did you get there?
It's a lot. Many years ago, a friend had mentioned the Geniza to me and described it as a time capsule. And like a lot of kids, I always found that idea really, really intriguing. Like, what would I put in my time capsule? And I really didn't think anything more about it. Then in 2011, two books appeared. The Adina Hoffman and Peter Cole book, Sacred Trash, which is beautiful. I highly recommend it. And the book Sacred Treasure by Mark Glickman. That's the one. That's the one. I don't have my Geniza library at hand. And they both mentioned that there was this massive digitization program going on where they were going to actually put together, reunite the fragments of the Geniza that at this point are now separated into 70 different libraries and collections around the world, and studying them was so difficult for scholars, and you had to have an absolutely prodigious memory. My hat's off to the early Geniza scholars that they could see a fragment in St. Petersburg and recognize something with the same handwriting in Cambridge. I mean, this is astonishing, and very few people can do it. So this Geniza digitization project was going to democratize, if you will, the whole idea of studying this thing. So I was sure that, I mean, this was really momentous. This is the greatest discovery of Jewish history that I'd never heard of. And I was convinced that there would be major television coverage, and that other filmmakers would be there. And I
so the trigger to this decision, as it happened for so many among us, is quite accidentally, I would say, that you get into this wonderful project.
Yeah, yeah. And it was really, I think that at the time, if I had known that it would take 8 years, and I really thought through the folly of making a documentary about documents, I might have thought twice. But when Ben Outhwaite told me that nobody was coming to film the digitization, and they were also conserving some of the last fragments that Cambridge had. And so I had all my own gear, and I didn't have to wait to raise money, and I just used points, went to Cambridge, and started to film.
Great.
And that's how it happened. And the more I filmed, the more fascinated I got.
Right. Well, obviously, there is so much to be enthusiastic with this material. Some of it is just mind blowing to anyone who just looking into it. Well, so what was the talking about working on the project? So, what was the greatest challenge you faced during this work? I mean, obviously, when scholars getting into working on Geniza material, so there was so much of discussion about the right methodology, the familiarity with the with studies. Geniza studies is a field by itself. What was the challenges you faced, maybe during different phases or stages in your work?
Well, the first challenge was identifying the leading Geniza scholars in the world, and going around and interviewing them. And they were in the USA, in Israel, in France, in the UK, in Canada. And I was hearing this narrative. I actually interviewed about 40 people. And I realized that they each had a piece of this story. And this was a story, after all, about putting together this massive jigsaw puzzle, and putting together the film would be that kind of a puzzle. I'd made a decision not to use an external narrator and to have the story be told through the eyes of the scholars themselves, because they were so wonderful and they're so passionate about the Geniza. And I thought if there was some way I could communicate that passion to the audience, I will have done my work. The second task was really finding fragments that were self-contained. Those fragments that I used with readings, where I had actors reading the fragments. They had to be self-contained. They couldn't require a lot of setup or discussion or where did it come from. And so many of these letters they're fabulous, but you don't know where it came from. And they say, that thing you told me about that other thing I didn't happen the way you thought it did. You have no idea what they're talking about. So I had to kind of go through and find these fragments. And I had some help, because every one of the scholars, I asked them to show me their favorite fragments. So that was a good start. Overall, through this whole experience and all of these years, I really felt that the film wouldn't be finished until I had filmed the Geniza chamber in the Ben Ezra synagogue. And that took a long time. It took 3 Egyptian governments, the support of the Canadian embassy and the Jewish community of Cairo, and then the tourism police, the national police, the press office, the Ministry of Antiquities, the Ministry of, I don't even remember. I think there were maybe 5 or 6 different pieces of that puzzle that I had to put together and get permission from all of these people. And everything was in place except the press office. And so with everything except the press office, I went to Cairo and spent the day before filming waiting for permission, basically. And it came in the late afternoon. And And the next day, I had minders over my shoulder the whole time. I'm not quite sure what their concerns were. Maybe that I would harm something physically. Maybe that I would film something that they didn't want me to film, which turned out to be anything with police.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I was able to pretty much get just about what I needed. So that was
well, brilliant. Two brief comments on this. One about the scholars, and maybe this is a good opportunity to mention that Geniza also had a very Philadelphian connection, a very strong one. Well, the greatest scholar of Geniza, Shlomo Dov Goitein, who was in fact the path-breaking person to study Geniza itself and to make this magnum opus of the Mediterranean society, the society of the word of the Geniza, and tells this story over 6 very thick volumes of daily life of people back then at the 10, 11, 12th century, working basically on these fragments of the Geniza. The other point, which is also, I think, important to understand the scope and the importance of this, is the Egyptian connection of this. And I would like to have your opinion about something that is of, I would say, kind of a bothering to me. And this is that, well, Geniza collections spread over the world in academic centers, museum, private collections, in about 70 different countries all over the world, from Russia to the US to Israel to Hungary, Cambridge, of course, England, so on and so forth. However, very few Geniza fragments of the 10, 11, 12th centuries kept in Cairo or left in Cairo. And when talking about filming in Egypt, which is a difficulty by itself to any filmmaker, but talking about filming on Egyptian antiquity and Egyptian Geniza, and this is something, these two words, Egyptian Geniza, is very rarely used. But this is a point that the Egyptians themselves are highly sensitive about it. So I'm just adding this to these challenges for a Canadian a filmmaker with all the reputation coming to Egypt, and from their own perspective, working in Egypt and filming in Egypt on something that they see as a very, I would say, sensitive issue in terms of the very question why we do not have Geniza left in Cairo. So it's not the question, but just a kind of a comment that I would love to hear your opinion. Have you met this kind of reaction about this working in Egypt on the Geniza?
Really, really fascinating. I showed, just before the world closed down, I showed the film in London and in Cairo. And in Cairo, it had been translated into Arabic. There were Arabic subtitles, and it was screened through the American University of Cairo in Tahrir Square, the old campus, and on the new campus in New Cairo. And it was a wonderful Q&A. It was well attended. I would venture to guess that most of the attendees were Muslim. And as I was packing up both times, I realized there was kind of a line of people, and they wanted to come up to me, and some of them were near tears, and they thanked me for making a film about Egyptian history.
Wonderful.
And about Egypt. And I think at that moment, I recognized that I think that this might be part of a change. The new government seems to be wanting to change the narrative a bit and not have everything framed in the context of the Arab-Israeli conflict, and to see Jews as a part of Egyptian history. I went to the Basatin Cemetery, which has been a Jewish cemetery since the 9th century. And, there are essentially no Jews there. Maybe, I think, 2 old women in Cairo and maybe a dozen people in Alexandria. So in the absence of Jews, this cemetery had really fallen to ruin. And there's a multicultural group of Christians, Muslims, and people of Jewish heritage who are working on the restoration, and there's money from the Egyptian government. So it was very, very interesting to see there's money that's going into the restoration of synagogues, and then Yoram has a wonderful project about some documents that you found. I believe it was in the Karaite synagogue.
Right, in the
1,000-year-old
synagogue.
Bible. Just amazing project. Now that's going to stay in Egypt. That's right. You're going to work with the Egyptians and keep it there. So
Definitely.
the question: if these artifacts aren't there and the people aren't there, how do we know that that's part of Egyptian history? It's a good question.
Right. So, but this is exactly something that I find extremely important, and following the film. Well, a handful of Jews remain in Egypt today. Maybe in Cairo, maybe 2, maybe 3 individuals. Now, this is a city of over 20 million population.
Yeah.
And within this city, maybe not many among our audience aware of this, 13 synagogues still stand in Cairo. So only 2 or 3 Jews live in the city, but you have 13 synagogues. You have a couple of cemeteries, one of them mentioned by you now, the Basatin Cemetery, and you have a visioner as the head of the community, which is Mrs. Magda Harun. And Magda Harun has this vision that although she is, as she used to say, the last one to lock the door, the last Jew in Egypt, still she's working with Egyptian, Muslim, and Copts on several projects of preservation Jewish heritage in Egypt. Now, the point is that the Jewish community in Cairo and in Alexandria still holds a rare collection of Judaica, manuscript, synagogue already mentioned, cemeteries already mentioned. Now, from Cairo to the Cloud, to my mind, this beautiful film allows us to tell the fantastic story of the Geniza in one hand, but also to talk about what is happening in the present with regard to Jewish treasures or heritage still exist in Egypt, and the amount of interest within the intellectual level and some ordinary Egyptian on Jewish history. This is unprecedented. And your wonderful work watching this film and screening the film in Cairo allows us to talk about what was then the Geniza and this history of over 1,000 years, but also to talk about Geniza today in Cairo, or about Geniza through your film, is to talk about the situation in Egypt. It's like talking about a Jewish heritage to say something about Egyptian cultural heritage. Jews were part of this story, and telling the story that includes Jews as part of the story is very revisionist in Egypt itself. This is a new, as you said rightly, this is a new page. It's something new. Luckily, we have this junction that Michelle came from Canada at the right time. The right person at the right time arrived in Cairo to like it fits very neatly and nicely into a one. Okay, we're running off time, so instead of inviting you to give a kind of a concluding note, if you want, I would like to ask, is there any key issue we are leaving out here that in this discussion?
There were so many things I wanted to include that there just wasn't time to include. Those two Scottish sisters have quite a story. And for a very long time, about 15 minutes of the film was basically devoted to the sisters. And I just couldn't let go of it until I realized that it really kind of, I was getting away from the Geniza story. So I have a lot more to say about them. And so I'm working on something about them now. It's one of my COVID projects, since I already have a great deal of material. There were so many really moving letters that I wished I could have included. There was one letter from the 11th century that a woman was writing. She was writing from Syria to her son in Cairo, and laying this guilt trip on him that I swear to God, it could have been. It was like, has Jewish motherhood always been this way? But you could just the dripping of the guilt. I hear from your brother, but I never hear from you. And
yes, I know this document.
Laundry, I don't worry about me. I'm wearing threads, but take care of yourself. But I never hear from you. Your brother's a good guy.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many like that, but that required a lot of explanation and who these people were and why they were writing to each other. And also so many fascinating areas of people's study. I mean, Marina Rustow, who has been studying the reverse side. You see here in the film where there was a discovery that on the reverse of all of these Jewish manuscripts were these Arabic decrees. And this is essentially the lost, the missing archive, particularly of Fatimid Egypt. And so she's gone through and put these things back together again. And these are the only documents that exist. We know that this was a very bureaucratic culture, that they wrote a lot of stuff down, and nobody knew for centuries, like, why don't we have this material? And it turned out a lot of it ended up being used as recycled paper in the Geniza. So there were so many stories like that. Just the wonder of somebody being able to look at an ancient manuscript and be able to tell me immediately, that one's from Spain. I can tell because of the way he makes his nun. And the level of scholarship is just so awe-inspiring. So I could have gone down. I mean, I could make a film about each of these scholars. They each had, and the Indian trade alone. I mean, my God, so much to say about that. Yeah.
Right. Okay. At this point, I think we should switch to have some Q&A from our audience. what we have here. Oh, I see someone is in fact pointing out about the Philadelphian connection that we already mentioned here, Professor Goitein. And this is from Ed Hoffman.
I filmed in the Cat Center. I'm sure recognized it. I filmed in the Cat Center, actually, the Geniza fragments in Philadelphia.
Oh yes, they have a nice small collection.
They do
in there.
Really beautiful little collection.
Right. Yeah. We have also. Oh, this is not a question, just a remark. So I don't know if we have more questions here. So maybe while we're waiting for someone to come up with a question or not, I would just push a little bit more into these treasures that still are in Egypt. And we definitely know today that most likely there are other Geniza sites that, most likely in Basatin cemetery, or plots, or Jewish family plots, burial plots, burial graveyards close to Basatin. Hopefully the authorities will start working on this collection. They already took out in the year 1987 a significant amount of documents, Geniza documents, from Basatin, and there are several Egyptian groups, mainly in Ain Shams University and Cairo University, working on this material. Two books have been published just in the last 5 years about Geniza in Arabic in Egypt, so it connects exactly with what we discussed here about this renewal, not only intention and awareness by the public, but also by scholars, Egyptian scholars, and this is, of course, very positive development. We are all looking forward for this. And in the world where we live, as you rightly mentioned, the digitization of the Geniza, if the Egyptian collection will be added one day into this marvelous virtual library, it will be just amazing for us and for the benefit of us all. The last point is that I mentioned Magda Harun, that Michelle, you worked with her. She's such a wonderful person with this vision that very soon to establish a Egyptian Jewish heritage library in Cairo, and to take the thousands of volumes that already been found in synagogues all over the city into this library, and to have all the manuscripts, old manuscripts, including the one that I worked and published an article on this ancient biblical manuscript. All this material will be in this library to be digitized and available to anyone in any point in the world. So if we don't have more questions, I would just close by saying that this film, From Cairo to the Cloud, of course should be in all libraries, academic libraries. I intend to use it for teaching, and to have it also in Egypt, in Cairo, in this library. Or maybe you will be even more, to consider to share with Magda some of the material that left out there on the floor during your work. So please, if you have more to add on this, it's the time.
Well, yeah, I was the representatives of the Jewish community are pretty amazing. They're both Magda had a Jewish mother who died last year, and she was buried in the cemetery, in the Basatin cemetery. And Sami has a Jewish father and a Muslim mother. And there are such people who are still in Egypt. And what's fascinating to me is how they have kind of rediscovered their Jewish heritage and embraced it and turned it into action to preserve what remains of the Jewish heritage in Egypt. But it's a real question, how do you take care of Jewish artifacts in the absence of Jews? And it seems as if there are solutions that are being found, and that there's a greater openness to accepting this material. So, and it was very upsetting to me while I was filming in the Ben Ezra. They wouldn't stop the tour groups. Groups. It's a tourist site. It's not used as a synagogue anymore. The trove is airsats. It's just kind of a for show. And there's so much misinformation. They say that Maimonides was buried there, that Ben Ezra the scribe wrote his scrolls there, that this is where Moses was brought from the Nile in his basket, and I would just love for all of that. There's enough real stuff. There's enough wonderful, true stuff that these trained guides could be providing, but there seemed to be a real ignorance. One of the best moments I had in Cairo was I was stuck, I was in an Uber in Cairo's legendary traffic with a very nice man who spoke not a word of English, and I speak not a word of Arabic, and we used Google Translate with each other. And he knew all about the Geniza. And what he texted to me was, "I'm not an educated man, but I love knowledge."
Wow.
And I
That's
just,
beautiful.
I was so moved by the openness and excitement that I felt from Egyptians about the subject.
Okay, we have some questions here. So the first I see on the screen is, do we have a sense of how many people or programs are currently working on Geniza materials nowadays? Well, very difficult to answer this. I can tell you that there are several major academic centers with dozens of scholars working on Geniza material on different fields and coming from various disciplines. How do you react to this, Michelle?
Wow. Well, I mean, I think that I was able to talk to most of the 40 amazing, well-known Geniza scholars who are established in their field, and there are a lot of graduate students and a lot of exciting stuff that's percolating up. I don't know. I mean, the major program, the place, I suppose, the Mecca for Geniza studies is probably Cambridge, because that's where most of the documents are. And there's the Geniza research unit there. So I would imagine that's, probably the major study. There's a Geniza lab in Princeton, headed by Marina Rustow. And I really don't know, perhaps you do, Yoram, how often the Geniza seems to be a course topic. You know, Jews in medieval times, if there is a class on medieval Jews, it's probably focusing on Europe. So it's my personal hope that there's more accessibility to Jews from other parts of the world, Jews of North African and Sephardic and Mizrahi descent. And this was a big thing that was a big hole in my Jewish education, I think, as a Jew in North America. It just wasn't, the history was really presented in this way that was extremely Ashkenazi in perspective, which makes sense. And the idea that 90% of the Jewish world spoke Arabic and lived under Islam in this one period was revelatory to me. I had no idea. I had no idea about that part of our history.
Well, we already mentioned Marina Rostow work, wonderful work, very, very impressive at Princeton University. There were scholars at the Hebrew University, Haifa University in Israel, other places all over the world, and already I mentioned the Egyptian scholars who are working on Geniza. Some of them had to go to Cambridge and New York and Philadelphia to work on Geniza fragments, but their works mainly been published in Arabic in Egypt. Talking about the content, one of the amazing contribution of Geniza studies was exactly to shift the scholarship from this Eurocentric Ashkenazi history, without minimizing its importance, but the scope of the documentation that this repository of the Geniza completely shaking the way that historians, and not only historians, think about the medieval era and see what Jewish life used to be, exactly by these small pieces of letters, personal notes, this mother from Damascus that you mentioned, or studying the alphabet in Hebrew letters for kids, or even drafts of Maimonides working on his brilliant writings. All this took place in Fustat and in Cairo in the 10, 11, 12th century. And studying all this contributed. In fact, it revolutionized the field, the knowledge about Jewish history worldwide, because we are not talking only about Jewish history in Egypt or in Islamic lands. The Geniza, as Goitein pointed out in his brilliant books, a Mediterranean society, but it goes to the Indian Ocean, to Morocco and to Europe and deep into Africa. So it's a kind of a global history of the medieval times, when we mostly used to think about something which is much more limited and marginal. And today we understand that the scope is okay. We have a comment here. I was surprised by the number of letters and mail exchanged between people at the time. Well, we are not. You are not alone. We all. It's mind blowing. It's mind blowing.
It was incredible. There were established routes. You would give your letters. You would know what ships were going where. You would send letters. Very often, it's turned up in the Geniza that the same letter was sent in multiple ways, because you never could be sure that that boat would actually arrive. I mean, it was dangerous. These were dangerous passages. And so there actually was a kind of postal service. And as you go into any community, especially any Jewish community, and there would be not quite an envelope, but on the outside, it would be, this goes to this guy. You'll find him. He is a trader who is in the silk market, and these things arrive. And what's really remarkable is that they wrote the answers often back on the same piece of paper. So you have this kind of micro writing in the margins, and
Right.
It was just, they really tried to cram a lot of stuff there. And I guess there's one other thing that I just wanted to say about the Geniza, which is different from what you found in the Karaite synagogue, this Bible. These were artifacts and manuscripts that were kept on purpose. What we're looking at in the Geniza is essentially a rubbish bin. We weren't meant to look at this stuff. These love letters weren't for us. These manuscripts, I can only imagine that after Maimonides died, and generations of family members had kept all of these papers, and then one day, my fantasy is somebody decided to downsize and had all these papers and said, great-great-great-grandpa had published the books the way he wanted them published. These are worthless. Let's put them in the Geniza. So everything that we're finding is really all this stuff that was discarded, either because it was no longer of use, or often, sometimes it was there were things in the Geniza that we weren't really supposed to know about, especially all this magical stuff. And I think that if I were to talk about one of the things that was really surprising to me was how prevalent a kind of household magic was. That you have this idea of the Jewish past, that everybody was perfectly observant, and their practice was impeccable, and only the one God. And then you find all of this evidence that people had amulets, and that they were working magical spells on each other, and writing things in lead by the light of the moon. That there was still this the simultaneous persistence of folk customs, and that was fascinating.
Yeah, well, exactly this allows us also to see how Jews were an integral part of this culture. Because if we compare amulets, for instance, that you mentioned, and look into Islamic documentation of medieval times, you would see that hardly you find something Jewish in this. Well, they use Judeo-Arabic in most cases, to write down these amulets. But in terms of the content, the way that you asking for this protection or blessing or cure is quite similar. I mean, the formula
Yeah.
is telling you something. Maybe for some of us will look like something minor, but I don't think so. I mean, this is the way that culture works.
Mm-hmm.
And we having this opportunity to look into this daily life and daily practices by ordinary people. And when we compare what we have from the Geniza with other ancient documentation, we can see how Jewish used to be part of this world, part of this, how they integrated. But also we have documentation of some highly tense period that documented in the Geniza, from personal accidents. Think about the great Maimonides getting the news, the bad news, that his beloved brother David sank somewhere in the Indian Ocean. We have this kind of information. The very formula of writing this Jewish text that was found in the Geniza is not far from what we have in Arabic for Muslim and for Copts in the case of Egypt, or other Christians in the East at the time. Well, I have another point here, or question. Where is it? No, not this one. Well, someone was asking here. I don't see it anymore. But was a question that if you to pick up a period in history, where did you find, where you want to go, where to live, or?
Well, as a woman, I would say probably nowhere. Unless I had the resources and the money and the guts of a woman like Wusha, the trader. But the medieval period was really, really, really fascinating. I mean, Yoram has mentioned this magnum opus, these books of Esti Goiteins, and some of them for me, especially the ones on the individual and on the family, I find they're page turners. It's endlessly interesting. And one of the most interesting things that he points out is that there wasn't a lot of cooking at home. Basically, medieval Jews were eating a lot of takeout. They'd go to the market and they would have little carriers, and in the animated sections you can actually see people carrying them, where they would basically collect the ingredients for their meal and eat it at home. You know, it was very there weren't a lot of trees, so a public oven made a lot more sense than to have many private ovens. So most people would either buy their bread in the market or make it at home and then bring it to the baker to cook it. And I found that, and the fact that a lot of women were, in the Geniza times, they were traveling. They were on the move. It wasn't only men taking these trips. But it did seem that it was that the women had a lot of agency on the one hand, and at the same time they were limited by what they were able to do. But within those limitations, they were extraordinary. And one of the most moving letters that I saw, and it was in Goitein's book, was men and women wore the same robes, essentially. And a woman was writing to her husband, and she said, "I wear your mantle." And it was so moving, you know, this was so personal. And we weren't supposed to see this. This was a private letter. And it reveals a lot. So as much as these people are different from us, there is a lot that we recognize. But as Tamar Alefi says at the end of the film, the past is a foreign country, and they did things differently there. And that was one of the fascinations for me about this whole Geniza stories. How did they do things? How were they like us, and how were they different from us?
Yeah. Well, I'm just trying to, just to sail into this wonderful land of imagination, try to think if we could find a Geniza in Tunisia or in Palestine or in other countries in the East and other places, how much that we can learn about this past time and change all we know about the past. And your film took us closer into this fantastic world, because not many taking this, this thick, and this is just one, right? Goitein's brilliant writing, and this is an excellent reading for scholars and very few among the, I would say, the general public. What is wonderful in this film, it popularized the very idea of Geniza and allows, I hope, many to enjoy this this wonderful piece of art that takes us to the to talk about the present, but to talk also about this Geniza time or Geniza society. I do not see more questions coming in. So I would like to conclude just by first thank you so much for your work, Michel. You can see that I'm a great fan of this, obviously, and to me, the most important is that it allows us to speak about both the past and the present, and the relevancy of this film is that, yes, it is a documentary about ages ago, like that's the past, it's a different country. As someone said, yes, but, and the but is not less important, it allows us to talk about us, about the present. And I also would like to thank the organizer for sponsoring this event, and I will leave you the last word, Michel.
Well, same, Yoram, thank you so much. It was really, really interesting, and Olivia and the people connected with the festival. It's been my honor, and I was really, really happy that it was going to screen in Philadelphia, because there is an important link to the Geniza story in that city. And I just would like to recommend, for those of you who are interested, there's a lot of, you can either approach it from the fiction end and read Guide for the Perplexed by Dara Horn, or the memoir end and read Amitav Ghosh's In an Antique Land, which is about his experiences studying the Geniza and also living in Egypt to perfect his Arabic. And then the other books that I mentioned, particularly Sacred Trash and Sacred Treasure. They're great reads, and hopefully it will inspire you to go on with the Geniza. But I have to say, it's completely addictive. So once you start, I have to warn you, you might not be able to stop. You just get your head in medieval Cairo and there you stay. So I hope it inspired some of you to do that. And if not, I hope you really enjoyed the film.
Thank you so much, Michel. I think that now we can ask Olivia take the wheel.
Thank you both so much. That was excellent. I really enjoyed listening to your conversation, and I can tell that our audience did as well from the comments. So thank you both for taking the time to join us. And all right, and also we have a message from Matt. Don't forget that From Cairo to the Cloud is streaming now until Tuesday at 1 p.m. on our platform. So if you have not seen it yet, please go watch. You can still purchase tickets if you're, not a sponsor and don't have access to our platform. So thank you both again. And I am going to look forward to your next documentary, Michelle.
Thank you. I'll hold you to it.
No problem here.
Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the festival.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
It's been wonderful.
Bye-bye, Michelle. It was
Bye-bye.
wonderful to
Bye-bye, Yoram.
have
Talk
this
to you
event.
soon, I hope. Bye-bye.
Yes, of course. Let's keep in touch. Bye-bye.
Definitely. Bye-bye.